Users have noticed that the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC News, has reserved the right in their privacy and cookies policy to contact your employer if you comment or post offensive content on their website. Yeah, that's right. That sounds like a joke, doesn't it? That's a true thing. That's a real news story. That's not something the Daily Mail's invented as part of some mad, paranoid right-wing fantasy. This is a real thing. If you go onto the BBC website, you post something on there that's politically incorrect, they will find out where you work and they will ruin you. Can you believe this? I want to do the biggest hatchet job on this story we can possibly do. I want to tear this story to bits. I think it's absolutely terrible. I think this should be an election issue. This is absolutely shocking. I want you to understand how shocking this is. Listen, Twitter user Frank Fisher posted a tweet yesterday, included a screenshot of a particular section of the BBC's privacy and cookies policy. It's been since reported in the Daily Mail and a number of other newspapers, which reads, if you post or send offensive, inappropriate or objectionable content anywhere on or to BBC websites or otherwise engage in any disruptive behaviour on any BBC service, the BBC may use your personal information to stop such behaviour. How sinister is that? How threatening is that? This organisation, they don't ever look in the mirror, do they? They don't ever look in the mirror. I think you should. This is the BBC, the same organisation that covered up Jimmy Savile's crimes. Right? With, again, and I quote from various reports, a bullying culture that bullied people into being silent. What are they doing now? They're telling you to be silent. If your words are politically incorrect, if your words are, quote, offensive, and remember how subjective that term is, if it's offensive, then they'll find you and ruin you. Absolutely insane. We're going to talk to Andrew Allison, Head of Campaigns at the Freedom Association. Andrew, what do you make of this? I'm absolutely outraged.
Yeah, I think you've just about said everything I was going to say in your intro there, Nick. I just completely agree with you, because who knows what is offensive? I mean, how high is the bar that the BBC is setting? How low is the bar that the BBC is setting? It just seems to be whatever the BBC thinks is offensive, they reserve the right to contact your employer and try and get you fired. I mean, it is just completely outrageous.
It couldn't be more Orwellian.
It's really word for it.
It really couldn't.
It couldn't be.
And let me put this in context as well for people who are not aware. George Orwell actually worked at the BBC and wrote large portions of 1984 whilst he was working there because of the way in which that organisation behaved. It's shocking, Andrew, really shocking.
It is completely shocking, and you're right. I mean, it should be raised as an election issue. It certainly should be raised, hopefully with one or two of the party leaders this week. Andrew Neil's kicking off at 7 o'clock on BBC One tonight, isn't he? But I mean, I can't imagine it's going to be raised. Although, if any presenter was going to raise it, or would have the guts to raise it on the BBC, it would be Andrew Neil.
Here's your problem, Andrew. Let me tell you, the difficulty that exists is this. I mean, organisations like your own, Head of Campaigns at the Freedom Association, I salute you for speaking out on this one, because broadcasters, as a general rule, it is career suicide to slag off the BBC, and that's how they operate. They have your Twitter feed, your Facebook feed, all of it is monitored constantly, and if you so much as fart a thought crime onto the airwaves, then you're in big trouble and you get grilled at the highest level. So that's the difficulty, I think. Bringing this up already is difficult because of the bullying organisation that exists behind it, Andrew, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. Although when George Entwistle had his brief stint as Director General of the BBC, I think it was pretty much John Humphreys that helped bring him down on the Today programme. But I think you've got to be a very, very well-established, almost fireproof presenter or interviewer, journalist on the BBC before you're ever going to speak out against your own organisation. You're completely right. But I do hope this is raised as an election issue. It's certainly something I'll be writing about and will be commenting on, because they simply should not be allowed to do this.
Well, let me float a theory past you. Now, I understand the Freedom Association, your take on the licence fee. You're not in favour of the licence fee, right? So here's one of the things, and this is what they say online. They say if the product is free, you are the product. So Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of things, great, it's free, but they've got a load of data on you, everything you've ever tweeted, everything you've ever idly thought, when you're drunk at 3 a.m. They have all of that on record, and that, in fact, is how they get the leverage. Well, this perhaps makes an argument for the license fee, does it not? Because, all right, you can't keep our data, but you can have our money. Maybe it'll boil down to that. What do you think?
Yeah, it could well do. I think you make a very valid point there. We've campaigned for the end of the license fee for quite a number of years, basically for free market principles. Everybody else has to subscribe, or shall we start from the other side? Every other broadcaster has to earn its buck. And it's only the BBC that doesn't have to earn its buck. And it's not that I'm particularly anti-BBC, because I imagine there's a lot of people who I know on the BBC who sort of listening to this and have read the story that will be recalling in horror and think, there again, we just shot ourselves in the foot. On election, I'm co-presenting a programme on my local BBC radio stations. I've got no problems with the BBC in that respect, but this is just this is just completely wrong. It's completely over the top, and I hope that this gets as much publicity as it possibly can. And if it does, then it might just prevent them from going on their planned route.
Well, Andrew, here's a theory, and I want you to shoot this down because, I do occasionally get into the realms of the intensely, ridiculously speculative nonsense. But, you're right. It's a huge potential price for the BBC to pay here. This kind of thing, were it not an election period, I think would have already have been a bigger story. I'm glad that it's already turning into a bigger story, and I'm one of the people pushing it as hard as I can. But the risks they're taking here are huge. So what is causing them to push these risks? That's what I'm thinking, because this to me looks like the thin end of an iceberg that we've already hit, and it regards the use of data that big companies have on us, how they use that data, political opinions, those kinds of things, how they're going to enforce that. I mean, what is the Freedom Association doing as regards data management and this kind of Orwellian use of it?
Well, this is something that we do campaign against, and of course another organisation as well, Big Brother Watch, does exactly the same. It's also how data is held, but that's probably a completely different sort of subject to go on to. But just briefly, the government tends to hold all our data in one huge database, whereas private companies tend to hold them in separate databases. So if one gets hacked, not all your data is vulnerable. But I think the only warning that I could give listeners is just be careful. What data that you actually hand over, because the more that you hand over, the more they've got on you. If you register for the BBC, which you have to, I've done that. I couldn't watch anything on iPlayer a week ago without being warned that I needed to register for it. Give the minimum amount of data possible. I guess the more that you give them and the more you tell about yourself, then the more they're going to have on you, and the more they'll be able to use it against you if that's indeed what they want to do. But it's so vague. That's the thing. We just don't know what they call offensive. Is saying that Jeremy Corbyn is an IRA sympathiser, is that being offensive? Is that being untrue? I happen to think it is true.
Well, Andrew, let me tell you this. There were actually witness testimonies that were posted upon a BBC website as regards Jimmy Savile. People were actually posting up, this man abused a relative of mine. Get the details off me. Here's my home phone number, that kind of stuff. And there's actually screenshots of that stuff being deleted because it was disrespectful to our Sir Jimmy Savile. News gathering organisation. So that's the kind of stuff. I'll tell you another thing. Yeah. I'm reading in the papers today, BBC Radio Leeds, they had a music quiz recently. It was a light-hearted music quiz about the Moors murderer, Ian Brady. That's the kind of standards we're talking about here. Standards which make no sense to anyone else other than the BBC.
Well, no, that's right. And on Jimmy Savile, while all this was going on and Jimmy Savile died, they were still posting lots of programmes in tribute of him. So Jimmy Savile evenings on BBC 3 or 4, or whatever it happens to be. They just didn't heed those warnings at all. And you're right, they're deleting comments where people are trying to say this is what this guy was actually like. I mean, what really made me laugh was, I think it was Michael Grade who said, well, we always knew there was something a little strange about him. Well, I thought, well, he's this guy with a big cigar in his hand, with chains around his neck, dressed in a shell suit. Yeah, I mean, he just looks like the ordinary bloke who walks down the street, doesn't he? So I mean, the fact that I thought there was something strange about him was hardly news, was it?
It's beyond parody, isn't it?
But it is beyond parody. All of this was going on under their nose, and they didn't do a thing about it.
Biggest journalistic organisation in the world, and just didn't spot him. Shocking. Andrew Allison, thanks for joining us. Head of campaigns of the Freedom Association. I have to be careful. There's an element when I'm presenting the radio of theatrics, right? But then there's an element of genuine passion, obviously. And the BBC make me so angry. It's so frustrating. There are great broadcasters who work there. Many of them are personal friends of mine. And, until the BBC Savile story broke, in the back of my mind, I always thought, I'll do that. That'll be my retirement. I'll go and work at the BBC and won't that be wonderful? But ultimately, it's just rotten to the core, that organisation, isn't it? I mean, I'll tell you more about that in a second. Absolutely rotten to the core, the BBC.